Some of you probably know me already. My name's Aideen. I am a first assistant editor working mainly in film and especially television drama. Before that, I worked in short form mainly, so commercials and music videos. So I won't go into the journey between the two. For me, that's a topic for another day. But suffice to say, I've seen the industry and indeed the job of assistant editor itself from quite a few different angles. I'm also, as Nia says, I'm a committee member in the post-production and facilities branch of BECTU, that's sometimes colloquially known as the Rough Assembly. And we're really trying to be a resource to you guys at the moment, which is why we're putting on these Wednesday webinars. The union themselves are fighting really, really hard at the moment during coronavirus for workers' rights and for freelancer support. So big props to them. We specifically within the post-production branch just felt this was a really good time to start offering these webinars for especially for people who are out of work and have extra time and are using that to upskill at the moment. So we're trying to just really energize and resource our own community. As Nia was saying, this will be posted on the Rough Assembly's YouTube channel afterwards. And as we're probably going to go into some technical stuff here, you can always go back into that whenever work starts up again and people start getting job opportunities. You can always dig this webinar back up and have a little look at that again and brush up before your next opportunity or gig. Okay, so I hope you enjoy the webinar. It's aimed very specifically at people who are at the very beginning of their career in editorial and in post-production. And that covers a particular spectrum of people. So this could be particularly helpful for you if you have already gotten a trainee job and you're already starting to learn on the job. Or maybe you're even a little bit further along, maybe you're already a second assistant editor or further, and you just want to brush up on some things and make sure that your foundations are really, really solid. Perhaps you're kind of on the outside looking in as well, so maybe you are a runner who's yet to begin their training, but you're working in post-production, but you've yet to kind of begin that training journey. Or maybe you are outside of the industry altogether, you're a student who's looking in, or you're in a different career and you're looking at a career change and you're looking into this instead, and you're trying to figure out what's ahead of you. My goal with this webinar is to try and give you a broad framework on which you can build your further training. So you're not going to put away your laptops and close your laptops at the end of today's session with a full understanding of the job by any means. A lot of the things that we're going to talk about and go into are concepts that really need to be gone over in much, much greater depth than we're going to cover tonight. And they really take time and experience to understand fully. But when I started training, and actually even before I landed my first job in the industry at all, when I was trying to learn things from various cobbled together sources, maybe videos or articles online, trying to figure out the lay of the land in post-production, what I found I struggled with the most was that I would come across a concept or a process and learn about it, but really have no idea where that fitted into the overall workflow that I'd be using eventually. When you become an editorial trainee, what you'll find is that you're often learning on the job from somebody who's a little bit higher up than you, who's often very stressed and busy, and who and just as and when they have time to talk you through the process, basically. So it's not necessarily done training within post-production. It's not necessarily done in a particularly linear fashion, and you're often left to kind of string things together yourself and figure it out as you go along, which is great. But if you're a real person who needs to know the bigger picture, that can sometimes be quite tricky. And nowadays, when I'm talking to runners and prospective trainees, it's very difficult for me to point them in the direction of resources to give them an idea of like where to begin their training, where to start learning what they need. Now, of course, there are resources out there. There's some great courses, such as Master the Workflow or Assistant Editors Bootcamp. Those are all really great, and I've heard good things about them. There's also a lot of Avid courses out there as well. And don't get me wrong, I do believe in investing in your own learning if you can. But it's very difficult to tell somebody who's on a runner's salary in London that they should be spending hundreds of pounds on these courses to get ahead in the game, really. There are, of course, free things out there as well. YouTube, as we all know, has a plethora of videos to enable you to, quote unquote, learn Avid. But what exactly do we mean when we say learn Avid? There are lots of videos that tell you what you need to know to get up and running to start cutting, or they might talk you through the user interface, the timeline, navigating the user settings, and so on and so forth. But it's very, very difficult to find a video that really looks under the hood of how Avid functions behind the scenes, how it handles media. And these are the things that you really, really need to know and to understand thoroughly as an assistant editor. Okay, so I'm hoping to start you off on your learning journey with a bit of a roadmap so that you, if you encounter a concept, you have a grid for it, or you've at least encountered it before and it won't be the first time you've heard about this. So we'll go a little bit into the nitty gritty, and then, but we'll fit that within a broader picture. Now, I want to squeeze in as much, like we have a huge amount of ground to cover tonight, and I want to squeeze in as much as I possibly can. But I also want to be helpful to you. So if I breeze past some jargony term and you're really stuck on it, just pop it in the chat if you can during the time when we're doing sort of the more Avid demo kind of stuff. And I would just ask during that time, because I don't know how useful this is going to be. I might find it distracting to actually keep up with what people's questions are. And as Nia says, if you've got something that's more Q&A specific, if you could pop that in the Q&A box instead, that'd be great. But maybe this is kind of the equivalent of me looking around a classroom and seeing who's confused and who's not, if that makes sense. And I don't want anyone lost and not able to follow along because of something I said 5 minutes ago, okay? All of us have had a time when we didn't know what certain words meant, okay? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen really quickly, and I have a little... There we go. View full screen. There we go. So I have got a little slideshow here, which is very exciting for any presentation. I'm going to quickly define what is an assistant editor in case anybody's unclear, and just to make sure we're all on the same page. So an assistant editor is the primary support role for the editor. So as an assistant, you're taking care of everything around the edit except the edit itself, okay? Your job as an assistant is to make sure that your editor does not have to think at all about the administrative or the technical side of the job. They can just go in and cut. So you're taking weight off their shoulders by doing that. Now, sometimes as you progress, you will, if you build up a certain level of trust with an editor, you'll also develop a bit of a creatively collaborative relationship with them as well. So they might have you do their sound design, temp up some visual effects. They might even have you assemble scenes or cut recaps, or they might invite you to give your opinion on a scene or an edit. That's usually something that happens as you progress through the ranks, which just to delineate that for you all, the progression within freelance drama is usually, it goes from runner, you start out as either a post-production runner or a post-PA, which, by the way, usually still applies even if you've been to university or film school. You still do need to start at that level and kind of get to know the job that way. You then end up, hopefully at some point, becoming a trainee. And that can happen a few different ways. And then you train for a little bit on the job. And once you're comfortable with all of the functions of the role, you can then become a second assistant editor, during which time you are supporting your first assistant editor, and you are still learning and becoming really thoroughly immersed in the job itself. And when you're comfortable enough that you can lead and manage a team, that you can design your own workflows, that you can problem solve on your own, you can become a first assistant editor. If you, it's a pathway to becoming an editor. So if you want to be an editor eventually, particularly in film and television drama, this is probably the best pathway for you, because throughout this whole process, right from training up to being a first and beyond, you are understanding how an editorial team works and what you can get out of them once you become an editor yourself, assuming you want to edit the sort of things that are big enough to require a full team. You are learning the software inside and out and backwards and forwards. And you're also, during this process, you're watching an edit on each of the jobs that you work on. You're watching edits take shape from start to finish, right from rough cut all the way through to the final finished product, which is hugely eye-opening and educational. And really crucially as well, you can get very intensive mentoring while you're an assistant from the editors that you're working with. Some of that will depend on the editor's temperament. Some people are more generous with their advice than others, but generally in this industry, if you want to cut and you make it clear to your editors that you want to cut, then they are more than happy to be extremely generous with their time, advice, feedback, mentoring, that sort of thing. It's quite a nice industry for that, actually. There's a lot of people who really want to sort of pour into others. It's also worth mentioning at this point that being a first assistant editor can be a career goal in and of itself. It's meaty enough of a role that once you get there, you could just keep doing it indefinitely and continue to upskill within that and work on more lofty things, you know. And if your skills and interests lie mainly within the technical or administrative side of things, that might be something to consider as well. I'm going to give you an overview of what we're going to cover today. So first of all, we are going to look at a very basic overview of the post-production workflow before we go any further, just so that you have an understanding of how everything fits together. Some of you might know a little bit about this already, but I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Then we are going to introduce a few technical processes. So we are going to talk about how Avid handles media and projects. We're going to look at how to bring in rushes, how to get them sunk up and prepped for your editor. Also, if you're watching this from outside the UK, what you'll find is that what we call rushes, you will call daily. So that's just the stuff that they shoot on set, basically, and the scenes that you need to prep for your editors. And then we're going to have a little whistle-stop tour of turnovers. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the front end of the process than the back end, but we'll get there eventually. So in order to do those, cover those technical processes, I am going to talk you through some material from a short film that I was working on recently. And then at the very end, we are going to discuss the soft skills that you need to do the job, which are as important, if not more so, than the technical side of things, okay? And I want to quickly just tell you what we're not going to cover so that you can be aware of what you might need to then go and learn elsewhere. I'm not going to cover prep. I'll touch on it, and although it's a very important part of the job, but this is really the responsibility of your first assistant editor. Your first assistant editor's job is to be the first point of contact for each of the departments, both on set while they're shooting, and the different departments who will take the finished product afterwards and do whatever they need to do with it. So you don't need to learn it as a trainee just yet. But what I would say is that once you have more of a handle on the job, you should be learning from your first assistant editor what it is how to do this prep. So you should be figuring out who do they need to liaise with, what sort of questions do they ask, what do they need to test before a job starts, and really crucially, how do they interact with the editor before the job starts. This might be, you know, maybe your first assistant has an ongoing relationship with an editor who brings them from job to job, but if they're working with an editor for the first time, what sort of conversations are they having to build that trust and collaboration to reassure the editor that they've got everything in hand and to get started on the best possible footing? We're not going to cover paperwork today. Again, the reason why basically is because the paperwork that you will be using really varies based on the type of realm that you want to assist in. So you will pretty much always have to learn how to read a DIT report. And I'll cover what a DIT is in a moment, so don't worry about that one. But if you want to assist in commercials, you're probably never going to see a line script or a facing page. At the end of this talk, I'm going to post a bunch of resources for further study if you want to. And there's a seminar that was posted by Blue Collar Post Collective a few months ago that was essentially an introduction to working in scripted drama. And it's a really good complement to this as like a follow-up. When it comes to the next phase of your learning, it kind of takes as a baseline assumption that you know a little bit about the job already and that you know Avid. And neither of those are assumptions that I'm going to make. So, but if those are things that you want to learn about, that's a great place to go next. Okay. We're not going to cover Avid. We'll be in Avid doing things, so you will pick things up as we go along. But I'm not going to cover how Avid's actual interface works, because there are already plenty of resources out there for that. And what I'm trying to do at the moment is really talk about things that I don't see elsewhere online. And finally, just to emphasize something, we're going to be going through some tech processes today, and we're going to talk about certain skills that you need to learn. We're not going to talk about tech concepts. So there are some slightly more nebulous conceptual things that you need to understand as an assistant editor that are beyond the scope of this webinar to really talk about, just because of time. Things such as frame rate, such as aspect ratio, codecs, etc. How different camera lenses interact with the aspect ratio, that sort of thing. In my experience, if you don't already know and understand this stuff, and actually even if you do, you're more likely to grasp it as you get to know the job and see how these things fit in the context of your day-to-day workflow. I will link at the end again to a great little explanatory video about codecs, which is probably a great place to start, since we'll be beginning to talk about the offline-online workflow in just a moment. But I really think these sorts of things are best learned on the job and in context. Okay. Now, on the next slide, please excuse this excruciating graphic. I got rid of my Photoshop account just before I started prepping for this webinar, so it's slightly less malleable preview than Photoshop is. On this slide, you'll see I've delineated the workflow into 3 main stages. So those are the big 3 orange headlines throughout. So you have the shoot, then you have the offline edit, and you have the online edit. You as assistant editor sit squarely in the middle of this process. So you receive material from the shoot in the beginning of the process, and then at the end of the process you hand things over to the various departments associated with and including the online edit. Now, these terms offline and online have nothing to do with the internet or the web. They actually originated during the days of analog. But essentially what happens, certainly nowadays, is that cameras shoot usually digitally. They shoot huge files. They are using a capture codec. There's no compression. There's huge amounts of information being captured onto these files. And you do not want to edit with those files, because they will crash your system unless you have a huge amount of horsepower. Nobody wants to pay for that, I assure you. So the cameras record with each take on these shots, these big shots, onto lots of memory cards. These memory cards are numbered and labeled by camera. And once these cards fill up on set, they are handed over to somebody on set who's known as a DIT, which stands for Data Input Technician. The DIT will then back up that footage and then run those huge original camera masters through a process that's known as transcoding, which is essentially, for our purposes here, it's making much smaller, more manageable files that are appropriate to edit with, and that also contain all of the metadata that, that you need to be able to get back to the original big files eventually. In Avid, these transcodes will almost always be a file with the file name extension .mxf, which we'll see in just a moment when we get to our demo. And the MXF transcodes will be the material that reaches you in editorial. Now, simultaneously, while these cameras are shooting the big files, you also have a sound team who are recording sound separately onto some audio equipment. And there will be a little box on set, usually a little timecode generator, sometimes called a locket box, that is transmitting data to both the camera equipment and the sound equipment simultaneously, to enable you in editorial to take those and sync them eventually automatically. But you will also have a clapper loader standing in frame at the start of each take, hopefully. Sometimes they don't, but they'll be standing in to provide a clap that, that will enable you to check whether this sync has worked or not, but also to help you do it manually if you have to as well, okay? And simultaneous to all of this, the third little box down at the bottom there is a script supervisor generating paperwork that will help you and your editor navigate the rushes that arrive on your doorstep, so to speak. Now, all this material then reaches you in editorial for the offline edit. Usually it comes in after the day's shoot or overnight or first thing in the morning, and the assistant editor's job is then to, well, A, check it to make sure everything's there, and B, then get the rushes sunk and ready for the editor, preferably before they start their day's work. Now, you'll notice just before the little dotted line, big sort of vertical dotted line, that there is a little optional box that says lab. And so sometimes what that means, basically, on more high-end jobs, you will sometimes have a film lab who will get the DIT's transcodes as well as the audio files before they reach you in editorial, and they will do all your syncing for you and provide you with a bin of sunk rushes, which is lovely because it means that you get to focus on other things. However, we're going to act as if they don't ever exist, because you need to know how to do it properly, and today we're going to learn how to sync rushes. Okay, so all this material lands on your in your machine as an assistant editor. Then it gets prepped and the editor gets the rushes, and they then begin, you'll see the next three boxes, they begin to assemble those rushes. So they assemble each scene in turn, which is basically just doing a rough cut essentially. And these assemblies take place more or less as the shoot continues, and then at the end of the process, maybe with a few extra days on the other side, they've done a rough cut. They will also, throughout the assembly process, be handing those assemblies back to you in editorial, so you can liaise with production. So usually it's the director and the producers might like to see those assemblies that the editor is generating in order to just check that everything is kind of working, they haven't missed anything. And you will also need to send, especially in scripted television, you will need to you'll need to liaise with the script supervisor as well, just to let them know what the scene timings are turning out as, so they can check if the episode is running over or under length. Okay. So after the shoot then, the director comes in and they will begin working on a fine cut, and other parties will come in at different stages of this process, producers, execs, networks, clients, etc. And once everyone is then happy with the eventual timeline, the timeline is then locked, and it goes back to the assistant editors, who then prep a bunch of different files and deliverables, sometimes known as turnovers, and basically in order to hand that timeline over to the online edit. And that is where that the locked timeline then goes through a process that's either called conforming or onlining, which is where they link back to those massive camera files in order to grade it, to polish it up, to do any visual effects at the highest possible quality of the files. And the assistants will also liaise with various other departments involved in finishing the film or the episode or a piece of whatever. Departments such as visual effects, music, composer, the sound, that sort of thing. And if everything has gone smoothly, which it's your job to make sure it does, every department then has everything they need to make sure that everything links back straightforwardly, that everyone's work then comes together at the end to make the finished product. So that's the kind of journey. You'll see your kind of the little blue arrow that goes from the rushes to the turnovers. But throughout this process, you will also have been providing general assisting to your editors. So that could be finding sound effects for them, doing a music search and importing that music. It could be temping up vis effects, recording voiceover, and also big time helping them with technical assistance, so keeping track of any problems that they're having with their machine, and either troubleshooting it yourself and researching solutions, or liaising with the hire company to resolve the issues that they're having, and there are usually a few on every job, you know. So I have a little follow-up graphic here that details some of the basic skills that you will need to learn as an assistant editor and where they fit into the workflow that we've just discussed. This list it's not exhaustive by any means, but this is kind of a good place to start. So I've put under shoot, I've put transcoding in a little box of its own. because that's a process when it comes to transcoding the camera masters into editable files. That's a process that's normally handled by the DIT. Although, without wanting to blind you with science too much, what we'll discover in a moment is that the process of importing anything else into Avid as well, because of the way in which Avid handles media, is in and of itself sort of transcoding. But for our purposes here, we're talking about transcoding the masters, the original camera masters, into the MXFs for editing with. So that's not immediately relevant to you as a trainee. But once you've learned some of these other processes that you will be using on a day-to-day basis, I think it's really important to come back then and learn how to transcode original camera masters into Avid's MXF file format using DaVinci Resolve. And the reason for that is this will help you troubleshoot massively. If you ever come across a job where the DIT has provided you with the wrong metadata within their files, or they've provided you with the wrong type of MXF, that can sometimes happen as well. That this will basically help you figure out what they've done wrong in order to resolve that. Okay, that's a learning task though for quite a way down the line if you're just starting out, and it's best learned from another assistant editor, okay, who knows that process. Now, the offline and the online edit, those next two boxes detail a few of the skills that are relevant during the offline edit, and then subsequently in getting the timeline ready for online. And these will be the things that you need to focus on and that we'll be touching upon today. You need to learn how Avid handles media, which we'll actually be spending quite a lot of time on tonight. You need to learn how to file check, how to bring in rushes, how to process those rushes, importing, exporting, general assisting, that sort of thing you will definitely be learning on the job. And then in the online, there are a number of deliverables that are kind of quite standard that you kind of need to know. So things like an EDL, which is an edit decision list, AAF, which stands for Advanced Authoring Format, and then how to provide different types of picture guide. Okay, so I am going to tab over to Avid really quickly. Great, so I've already got my project set up for training, and as you'll see with the sort of open folders here, I've got my my audio for day 1 and 2, my rushes for day 1 and 2, and I've already sunk those up for day 1 and 2 as well. But this particular project was a 3-day shoot. So what we're going to do together is bring in the rushes from day 3 and prep them for our editor. So before I do anything else, I am going to press Command 5, or it would be Control 5 if you're on a Windows machine. And I am basically going to make sure that my media creation is set up correctly. So I've got an external hard drive that I want everything to go to instead of the internal hard drive that's on my machine. And I want it to go in at a particular resolution. So first of all, I am going to filter out system drive and launch drive. That basically means that it's not even going to give me the option to save media to my internal hard drive. And you'll see the root hard drive is now grayed out, and I've just got external hard drive 2, external hard drive 2. So that's where I want my video and my audio to go. We want our video resolution to be DNxHD36. DNxHD is a codec that Avid themselves developed specifically for use in post-production, so you'll come across that term a lot if you haven't already. And these little numbers on the side are basically to do with bit rate. So we want it at the lowest quality possible, because the whole point is that we're not editing with the massive files. We just want them good enough for us to work with, and then they'll work with much bigger files eventually. If you're working on bigger jobs, like if you're working on, I don't know, Star Trek or whatever like that, they might use a higher MXF. But for our purposes, 36 is perfect. So I'm going to apply that to all. I'm going to go through and just check that that has applied across the board in all my other tabs. Great, it has. Wonderful. Okay. Cool. So I've got my external hard drive plugged in. Here we go. Let me just give this a little tidy first. Okay. Cool. So what you'll see here is on my external hard drive, I have got a whole bunch of different short films and music videos and so on that I am currently working on or have been working on recently. Now, you'll see what I said, what I did mention is that we've got, I've already brought in my Rushes Day 1 and my Rushes Day 2, but as you can see here, they're both offline. And we will get into the reason for that in just a moment and show you how to solve that, even though the rushes are actually on this drive. But first and foremost, I just kind of want to explain a few things about how Avid Media works. And so I'm going to demonstrate that by importing some sound effects. Actually, I think I already have a bin for that. Yes, I do. Okay. So in my audio folder, I've got a little sound effects folder. Let me delete these. Start from scratch. Great. So let's go with, let's import the Mini Cooper. That sounds like a great place to start. That's okay. And you'll see it's saying creating MXF media from WAV files. So unlike if you've worked in Premiere or Final Cut or something like that before, where the process of importing is basically just a case of pointing the piece of software to where that WAV file, where that MP4 file that you're trying to import is located. And if you move that around, you then have to kind of repoint it to that. When you import anything into Avid, it actually creates a fresh bit of media. And so it's never looking at the original file, it's created a little transcoding process. So if we go back over to our external hard drive, what you will see is that where before there was just my neatly color-coded folders, we now have an extra folder in here. So anytime you import anything into Avid, it automatically generates this particular folder structure at the root of whatever hard drive it is that you're using to import to, which is why it's quite important to be intentional and set those media creation settings at the beginning so that this media ends up going to the right place. And I want you to pay really, really, really good attention, if you haven't come across this before, to the way in which this is spelt, the way in which this is capitalized and spaced out. So you have Avid with a capital A, then a space, and then media files, all bunched together with a capital M and a capital F. Ah, Jason, you're saying the audio went out. What did you miss specifically? I'll just back up and talk about that really quickly, just the Avid media files. The file that we've just imported, the process of importing that has created this Avid Media Files folder structure. And it has gone from, basically it's created Avid Media Files, which is really important to spell correctly. It's created a folder within that called MXF, and then it's created a little folder that says 1. Inside that folder, you have a database file, a media sort of record file, and then 2 little .mxfs, which pertain to the 1 file that we've just imported. If I click into this file now, what you'll see is that it's got 2 tracks of audio. And so each of those MXFs pertains to 1 of the tracks of audio, okay? So let's go back to the start. Now, remember what I said about the Avid Media Files folder needing to be spelled completely correctly and with with exactly the right spacing and stuff. So if I mess with this at all, so say I remove the space, for example, okay, and I go back over to Avid, this file should technically go offline. It's taking a little bit to kind of register that that has happened. Yes, there we go. So that file is now offline, even though it is basically in exactly the same place as we put it, and we just changed to Avid Media Files. We spelt that wrong and we spaced it out wrong, okay? If I then want to import another file, by the way, you can import other ways as well. I like to drag and drop because I'm very confident that I've done my media creation settings okay, and it'll always go right. But you can also use Source Browser, which kind of recreates your Finder window within Avid, and you can also just go to import media and find it and then do import that way. We're not going to do that though. I like to drag and drop. So I'm going to drag and drop this next file. Okay. We've got this golf car. Great, so what you'll see now is that it has bypassed and ignored the Avid Media Files folder that we had from before that we that had the Mini Cooper in it. And it has gone and created a whole fresh one with the golf cart in it, okay? So what I'm going to do, I don't want, we want both of these sort of live in our Avid. So I'm actually just going to correct this grievous error that we've made happen. I'm going to drag this back in with the other MXFs from the other sound effects that we have. I'll leave that there. I'm confident that this doesn't contain anything now, so I'm happy to just delete that one, and I am going to put the space back in to our Avid Media Files folder. And what you'll find in a moment is that I'm going to tab back to Avid, and it is going to, it might be a bit of a blink and you miss it job in this particular case, but it is going to scan this one folder again, and both of our items are going to come online. So there we go, scanning. So now we see our golf cart is online and our Mini Cooper is online as well. Now, the reason why it was able to scan that folder is because it has a number. And it can scan anything that has a number, doesn't matter what that number is. But if this number 1 is not available to it, even if everything else is located correctly, say we call this folder 2 instead, and then we go to, in fact, let's, because I'm about to explain something else about this in a moment, I'm just going to rename this 200, let's say, right? If I then go and I want to import yet another sound effect, cool. So everything is still online, but in our MXF, our Avid Media Files folder structure, it has now created a new one folder with that forward in it, the latest sound effect that we've just imported, and it's changed, it's left these intact and it's still reading this, but because we've renamed it to another number, it's gone ahead. So basically, if you leave this intact and you don't do anything to it, this one folder will just continue to fill up and up and up until it hits 5,000, and then it will create a 2 folder, and then it will go on and on and on until, if you kind of go crazy and import 50,000 sound effects, then it will create 3, 4, etc., etc. That's if you leave it alone. I tend to not like to leave it alone. I tend to want to organize mine a little bit more thoroughly than that. So I'm actually just going to ensure that all my sound effects are in the same media folder. What it's going to do now is it's going to rescan. Actually, let me show you something else. If I call this sound effects, okay, if I give it a label that isn't a number, it will still read whatever was in here before I renamed it. So these 2 database files, this PMR file is a persistent media record, and that's media database, and they pertain respectively to, they kind of note what's in each of these folders, and then they kind of contain metadata about what, like all the material in it as well. So what we'll probably find here is, yes, okay, so our Ford Escort, which we still moved in into our sound effects folder, has gone offline. The other 2 are available to us, and the reason why is normally what you would want is to be able to, and it's actually rescanned this one because it's got a number. But if we want it to read everything, we want it to basically rescan every time that this changes. So if I give that a number, go back to Avid, let it scan, there we go. Okay, now it's online. So that's fine. Now that I have this kind of as full as I want it to be, I can then rename it to whatever I want. That's fine for me because I'm working individually. on my own internal hard drive. If you are working on a shared Avid system, which you definitely will be as an assistant editor, it's very important to only rename these media folders once you're sure that nobody's using them. So if you have another editor who's logged onto the system at the same time, you need to wait till they've shut down their machine and gone home before you do this sort of thing, okay? Great. Okay, I think we've kind of covered that for now. Basically, let's go into our actual rushes. So you'll see we've still got rushes day 1 and 2 that are offline, and we're about to bring that online. So in each of these, I want to change this now. So I want to keep this Avid media. I want to keep my media here, but I'm just going to put a little Z at the start so it can't read that anymore, because I want to bring in a pre-existing Avid media files folder structure, and this is the one for this particular short film. So I drag this out to the root. What you'll see is that my rushes now suddenly come online. Rushes day 2 haven't yet, and I've done that deliberately, and I'll show you why in just a second. But rushes day 1 are all online, and that you'll see kind of why I label things now, why I color code these things, because each of these individual Avid media files structures for each of these short films, you can only have one loose at the root at any one given time, but you can't necessarily distinguish them from each other because they have all the MXFs have names like that, you know. Okay, and that's why I kind of anything. So this one's green in accordance with the whatever's at the root. Okay, that won't be so much of a problem when you're on an actual job, because you'll all just be working on the one thing, you know. Great. So remember what we talked about earlier about the camera masters and the transcode. So I'm going to look here. I've got my day 3 rushes. I've got the these are the great big original camera files here. So you've got as you can see, they're kind of labeled AO18. So that's the A camera. That's the 18th card that they shot on this job. And then there are a total of 12 clips in that card. Each of these clips, as you can see, I mean, they're about this. Okay, here's one. That one's 25 gigabytes. You definitely don't want to be editing with that. And they're all too big to edit with, essentially. So essentially, what we've got here are a whole batch of MXF transcodes that we made in DaVinci Resolve, pre-existing. So I've acted as my own DIT on this. And what we want to do is bring those into the Avid. So I am going to drag and drop that into my my existing Avid media files structure. So that's here. If I tab back to Avid, nothing happens. But if I change this to any old number, so I'm going to copy day 3 because I want to call it that, and I give it a number, so I say 103. What it's going to do now is index and scan that, and I'm now going to have those rushes available to me. Now, in order to bring those in, now that those are in, I am going to rename this just to keep it neat. Rushes day 3. Okay, and what you'll find here is that not only have you got those MXF files, but right at the bottom, it has now created a persistent media record in a database file, okay? And in order to bring these rushes in, all I have to do is create a new bin and say rushes day 3, okay? And then if I, so hard doing this on the laptop, isn't it? If I drag and drop this database file, this will then populate this bin with all of my rushes in no particular order. It's gone from clip 8 of card 18 to clip 15 of card 17, but that's fine because if I double click on name, it will rearrange it the way that I want. Okay. Now, as you'll see as well, these are all online, and our day 2 rushes are still offline. And what I've done basically is to kind of demonstrate what would happen if a media file got corrupt. So if you are looking at a drive and some media is offline and there's no rhyme or reason to why it should be offline, you know, your Avid media files is spelled correctly, You've got your MXF folder. It's got, if you look in Russia's Day 2, it's got a database folder, database files available to it. It could be because these files have become corrupt. So I'm just going to get rid of those. Sometimes it's a good idea to back those up, but I'm confident that they're fine. And I'm just going to give this a number, let's say 2. And I'm going to tab back to Avid, and it's going to scan that. Okay, and bring them all online, which is great. And then I can rename that back to the way I want it now that they are all online. So I'm going to get rid of these 2. Okay. Now what you'll notice, there's a big difference between Russia's Day 2 and Day 1, and then also these files that have just come in, and that is because those files are log, and they haven't got a lot on them. They haven't got basically these ARRI cameras will capture things usually with as much information as possible, and that will leave the image looking very flat. And then in order to kind of basically the DIT will normally put on something called a lookup table that kind of enables the footage to be interpreted the way it's kind of meant to in the end. Before the actual grade happens, but it'll allow you to kind of see roughly what it's supposed to look like. A DIT will actually, a proper DIT will go through each one of these and give it its own custom LUT. But what we're going to do here is go into source settings. And bear in mind, this will usually be done for you in Drama, but I think it's important to know how to do it yourself. So I've found one that's ARRI Alexa, which was the brand of camera that shot this. Log C to Rec 709. I'm going to add that. That's going to become nice and vibrant for us. I'm going to apply to all. But definitely if you have footage that comes in without the LUT, or conversely, if you want to work in commercials and the footage comes in, the transcodes already have a LUT on them, that might not be the way the editor wants it. So that's often something to query. But yeah, usually in Drama it will come in with this LUT already pre-baked into it from the shoot itself. Okay, so this is where we would go through, and normally you would file check. I don't have that many of the original camera masters for us to do that against, but you would basically go through and check that every single clip is there. You would maybe make a little table and check them off against it based on the DIT report, okay? So we've got our Russia's Day 3. We also want our audio Day 3. So I'm going to go back to the drive and import that. So let's go into here, sound. There we go. And again, I'm going to just drag and drop these because I have got my media creation done to perfection. Cool. While that's happening in the background, I'm just going to talk you through something else to do with these Avid media files. So now what you'll see is that it's starting to populate this one folder with all of those WAV files that we've just imported. They are slowly kind of picking up and up. We will then eventually, once they're all imported, rename this to Audio Day 3. It's worth pointing out that the numbering system works as simply because I am on an individual external hard drive. There's nobody else who's networked into this hard drive at the moment. There's not multiple machines wanting to access it. Now, what would happen if you were in a post house or if you were working in a team-based system is instead of having an external hard drive, you would have a great big massive hard drive that's what's the equivalent of a hard drive that houses all of your Avid media. And it's usually a system called Nexus, which used to be called ISIS. You'll hear people say that sometimes. Obviously, they've changed their names for obvious reasons. But if you and multiple other editors and users were working on a system, one of you can't be importing to a folder named 1 and somebody else imported to a folder named 1. So what you'll see here is this is a music video for which I imported most of my media files when I was still working at a post house. And what you'll see here is the 1 folder it doesn't say just one, it says the name of the machine and then a .1. So if you want to scan everything that we've just done in terms of scanning folders, you can't just rename it to a number and expect that to work. You have to give that folder the name of the machine that you're on. So if we were to do that here and we were networked in, you can see that my device is called Aideen's MacBook Pro. I would probably have to call that folder Aideen's MacBook Pro.1. Although I'm not sure how it handles apostrophes, but this is why if you're at the beginning of a job, it's really good to name everybody's machine, get everyone's machine named according to who they are, so you can see kind of who's imported what, if that makes sense. I wonder if I've got any others like that. I don't think that I do. Yeah, no, this was all imported externally. Short film maybe. No. Okay, cool. But you get the gist anyway. Let me see how this import's going. So we're nearly there, I think. And once this is all imported, we are then going to see what it means to sync all of our rushes. There's a few various ones in there as well. Okay. Up to 7. Okay, great. So once all of these are imported, what you'll see is that, oh, here we go, and it's then scanning this folder at the end just to be sure that it has a proper record. Okay. So then what we are going to do with all of our video and our audio files from the day 3 rushes is we are then going to create a brand new bin, and we'll call that the sync bin. And what we want to do is be putting both of them together into the bin. And I've specifically chosen a short film for which they did actually shoot it properly. They have got, they used everything, all the clapper loaders and everything correctly. And they had this locket box on set sending them timecodes. So we will be able to do this automatically. What we will see as well is that it didn't always work. So that's quite a good thing about working on low budget things, is that you will often come across problems that you need to solve that you won't always necessarily come across if you only ever do high-end things. Sync day 3, let's do this, okay. Now, also, it's worth bearing in mind, there are quite a lot of ways of doing this. I'm just going to show you my particular method of syncing, but as you go through your training, you'll probably find a few other tricks along the way as well. So I've moved my audio rushes and my video rushes into the same drive. Before we sync it, I just want you to pay attention to the start time code here. So I'm going to order all of our files by start time code, and what you'll find is that they all intersperse. So you have audio files and video files all mixed in together. If I go to sync all of this, what I would normally do on a really sort of proper job is I would bring everything together. I would just highlight all and then press auto sync. This isn't going to work in this case because there were a few times where the time code dropped out. So what you'll see is if I do what you need to do to sync it, which is you go to clip, auto sync, it brings up our sync sort of dialog box. We want to sync it by the source time code because that is, which is that start column that we just looked at there. And the reason for that is that it should work. You'll see in a second that it doesn't fully work. And actually, before I do that, I just want to point something out to you. If I go into one of these audio files, no, I don't want 147 items. Let me just click on one of them. Great. So what you'll see is that on each of these audio files, there are 5 different audio tracks. They all have slightly different waveforms, and that's because each of those tracks are picking up different things. Normally the sound recorders will actually record a certain amount of waveform, they'll record metadata into their audio recording equipment that results in the following columns in Avid. So you have a little column that says what each of these tracks is. So we can see that track 1 and 2 are the mixed tracks, which is basically where the sound recordist has multiple other mics dotted through, around the system. So they might have a boom, and then they've got a radio mic on each of the characters. And then they will also be mixing them live kind of as they're recording to find the best combination of all of them. And often, instead of syncing to all of those tracks, what you'll find is that you just want to be syncing to the first two mix ones, okay? Often these as well, instead of saying boom and then radio 1, radio 2, they will actually give the name of the character who's being mic'd up. So, you know, it'll actually say somebody's name here. But not in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through card by card and start to sync these. So let's do bin, sorry, click, auto sync. And what I want is for it to sync to A1, the range starts at A1, and I want it to end at A2 because I don't want to be editing with 7 tracks of audio. I just want to be editing with those first 2 mix tracks, okay? So I'm going to click OK, and that's going to produce a bunch of sync files up here for me for that card A23. I'm then going to go through and do A024. Look at that. Auto sync. That's created some more sync files. Let's just go through and get the rest done. And I actually, instead of having to go click auto sync all the time, I actually have this mapped to the keyboard on my keypad. So if I press Shift S in my particular case, I can bring that up. Rihanna, you asked why didn't you auto sync that all at once? Basically, the reason for that, normally I would. And unfortunately, I have got rushes upstairs for the job I'm actually working on at the moment as an assistant, but because of NDAs and so on, I can't actually show you those proper rushes. This is a low budget short film, and with low budget things, they don't always do everything correctly. So you'll see, if you look to the right of my sync selection dialog box, you'll see all sorts of time code going on there, and sometimes it can be shooting at, you know, 4 p.m, 5 p.m, all the way through to 1 in the morning. But actually, in this case, I think it's because some of it dropped out. And actually, the other thing as well is that some of these files I happen to know are slow motion files, which slow motion files, because they're recorded at a different frame rate than your regular things, they actually won't auto sync anyway, or if they do, it comes out incorrect. So we're not going to use those basically today. And that's why I'm kind of doing this in batch by batch, because I've tested these and they don't all fully work. So I hope that kind of makes sense. It's really just a sort of problem solving thing for me. But yes, I would auto sync them all at once usually. So I'm going to click OK. We're kind of just going to play a little bit of make-believe. Yes, thanks, Rihanna. I'm glad that makes sense. We're basically going to, what we'll find when we actually go into these is that they actually haven't sunk properly. So if I turn on my caps lock, you'll see it go through. I have had, by the way, I have had permission from the director to use these rushes. Here we go. Let's actually listen to this. So great. So they've clapped that. They've done really, really well. But because they've clapped that, I can see that it's out of sync actually. So the clap happens there. It should actually really be happening there. Okay, so it's 1 frame out. If you find that you have, that's an easy fix thing, because we've seen that we can see it basically. Let's go there. So what the way to fix this manually is I've got a little icon here that says match frame. I don't know how many of you have used this before. If I match that back to the video, the original Camera Master, you see the one that hasn't got any audio sunk to it, right? So I want to match that back to the video where that clap happens and where I'm expecting to find that clap. I'm going to press match frame, and it is going to not only go to that frame in the original camera file, but it's also going to put a little in point there, which is going to be very handy, and that's what I want, because I want it to use that in point to sync to. And if I go back to the sync file and I find, oh, I'm going to just click off of it, haven't I? I'm going to find the first point at which that clap kicks in. There we go. So that is what I want to happen at the same time as it's the sticks are fully down. So what I'm going to do here, I hope you can see this, is I'm going to deselect V1 and I'm going to match back, and what that's going to do is match that back to the audio and put my in point at exactly the right place. Okay, so I'm going to go to my video and my audio file and I'm going to auto sync that by the in points this time, okay? Great. I'm pretty happy I can delete that sync file now, and I'm going to go to this and check it through. Brilliant, that's exactly where I want it, okay? And then the other thing I want to be checking with this, I do my start time code. So I want to be checking my clap is correct, and then the other thing to check really is just to kind of scrub through the rest of the file, just to see if you can find a bit of actual sync, either somebody talking or somebody hitting something, so you can check that that wasn't sort of a false stick. Sometimes the clapper loader will they'll clap once and then they've clapped that wrong, and you've sunk it to the wrong clap. So you just want to make sure that you actually have sunk it to the right thing, okay? Okay, so are they going to talk? Okay. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, a bit of swearing there on a Wednesday evening. Okay, cool. So the other thing that I tend to do when I'm syncing as well, just to be really thorough, is when I'm happy with my sync clip, I will then go to this up here, I will go to bin, select, and select media relatives, and that will basically auto highlight the files that were used in the making of that sync file. And what I can see here is that those durations, I'm not too worried about the duration of the audio track, because that usually starts and ends both before and after the camera file has been shooting, okay? But what I'm seeing here is that the duration of these two, of the audio, the sync clip and the video clip, are both completely exactly the same. Once I'm satisfied with that, I'm just going to give that a little color code. I'm going to color that green because that means that's a good thing. And I'm basically going to go through each of these other files and check them to see whether the sync has worked or not. So let's go back. Exactly the same thing has happened here. The audio, it's one frame out. And actually, if you were to go through the rest of your rushes, at this point, I would look through the rest of my rushes and see, is that going to be consistent? Well, that one's fine, I think. Maybe not. That looks like it could be a bit questionable. If you basically go through the rest of your rushes and you find that it's all a frame out, you can then use, yeah, that is out. So everything's a frame out. I could then also duplicate my start time code for whichever one I find is out, and duplicate it to the auxiliary time code. In order to do that, I would need to bring the audio and the video out separately. And I'm not going to go too deeply into that just because we don't really have time for that, but that's just a little problem solving thing for you to be aware of, that if something is consistently out, you can kind of manipulate a sort of a duplicate of the time code in order to get that right, okay? But what we're going to do here is we are going to pretend that this was all in sync. So I'm going to go through, I'm happy with that, I'm happy with the sync. There we go. I am also going to, I'll show you I'll do that again, sorry. Select media relatives, and that has come out, look, the durations are perfect. Great, 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 great. Same with this one, I'm going to pretend that I've checked that and it's in sync. Don't do this in real life, by the way. And I'm going to select those media relatives. I also have that, just like sync, I've got that mapped to a particular keypad on my, into a particular key on my keypad, just for ease. I'll probably change it when I start editing full time, because I'm not going to need to check that sort of thing eventually. So let's go through until we find something that's wrong. La-di-da-di-da. So basically with each of these, what you would be doing is going through and checking the clap and a bit of the sync on each one of these. Okay, we've come across our first discrepancy here. So what you'll see here is on the sync clip, you've got the duration is 3:04:09. On the original camera file, however, the duration is 3:14:13. So what you'll find is basically, if I were to match the first frame back, that is true to the very first frame of that clip. But if I match that last frame back, let me just get in there. That's the last frame. I match that back. We can see that there's a whole bunch of, there's a chunk of stuff left at the end. So that's 10 seconds that it's cut off. And I'll explain to you the reason for that. If you've ever sunk things using Premiere Pro, what you'll find is that it tends to kind of sync the whole thing together and leave the tail of both the audio and the video kind of just intact. Whereas Avid, what it tends to do is it takes the lowest common denominator of where the sync kind of overlaps between the audio and the video. So I've got a little demo extra sync length. Okay, so let's look at what happened if I cut both of those into a sequence. I can show you here. Here we go. So if I go over here, this stuff is all offline. That's fine. So what you'll see is that when it comes to the sync, the audio kicks in first, and then the video kicks in, and that's fine. That's where the sync would normally start. And normally then when they yell cut, the camera will cut first, and then the audio will cut afterwards. But what's happened here is the audio has cut first and the camera's cut afterwards. So if I put my in point right at the beginning of where that video clip is, and then if I put my out point right at the point where the audio cuts out, you'll see that the duration there is 3:04:09, just like our sync clip. And what to do with that really depends on the realm in which you're working and the editor that you're working with. So generally speaking, I find in drama, editors don't really care if there's like a little tail end missing at the end. They are really working off the notes that the script supervisor provides for you. And really what they have available to you is, you know, the slates and takes in each individual scene. They want their bins, their scene bins to kind of match that quite clearly. And they don't really care about false takes so much, or they don't really care about the tail ends of takes. It would definitely be something to discuss with them though, just to double check. And, but what you'll find if you work, what I find certainly with the particular batch of editors I was working with when I worked in commercials, is that actually the editors love all that stuff that comes at the end of the clips. So they would have me then go in and check those sort of things. And if there's a significant amount, we're talking, you know, if there's only like 15 frames in it, you don't bother. But if you're doing a car commercial, for example, that bit after the yelled cut and then the camera is kind of drifting off to one side and it's about to cut, but there's like a little dash of movement. Sometimes that could be exactly what they want to kind of make the music video or the car commercial look really zippy and stuff. So what they would have me do is, and you'll watch here, this is, I've put an in point and an out point for the rest of that clip. And what I'm going to do here is drag this little icon. If I go onto this icon, it says create subclip, and that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to basically drag and drop. Sorry, my zoom is getting in the way. Let me move my composer window down a little bit. I'm going to create that subclip by dragging that into the bin. And so what you'll see is I've got that little clip of 10:04. If I order this again by start time code, and I've got my little sync and then my post sync. If I highlight both of those together and do bin info, it'll bring up my console window, and you'll see that the duration of both of those combined is 3:14:13, which is the exact duration of our original camera file. That's if you've got that type of an editor. For this purposes, because this is a drama shoot and the editor is me, I'm going to pretend that that's fine. Okay, cool. So basically you just go on and on through the bin, checking your sync and making sure that everything is hunky-dory with it all. And then once you have everything ready, I would just basically, do you see this column here on the side that has a whole bunch of different icons in, and it has little icons that look like a waveform for the audio. It's got a little sort of video clip file for the original camera file, and then these sub clips that are the sync clips are these little tiny thinner icons basically. If I double click on this, this will order this bin by icon. I mean, it kind of messes that part up, but at least our sync clips are down at the bottom by themselves. We'll just color them all in green. I'm going to do get media relatives on them to highlight whatever else was associated with them, and then color them all green. Great. So, and then I'm just going to highlight my sync clips, and I'm going to, oh yes, I'm already in the sync bin, aren't I? I'm going to drag my, instead I'm going to drag my rushes and my audio off to one side. So I'm going to, instead I'm going to order it by name, because that's the easiest way of getting the audio all to the top. Drag those in, and remember there were a few that were called various right at the bottom. Rushes, sorry, drag them into the rushes bin. Don't do this, guys. Here we go, audio day 3. And then I'm going to order these by icon again, and then take my rushes into the rushes bin. And basically what you would be looking for is an entire bin of things that are color coded the way that you want them, so that you can double check that you haven't missed anything. There's going to be another set of color coding that I do in a second, that we're going to have to be a little bit more collaborative with our editor, and I'll talk you through that in just a moment. But I'm going to close those bins for now, because we can sort of safely put those away in their respective folders, knowing that we've dealt with that part of the process at least, okay? What you then want to do is go through and rename your sync clips. Now you might ask why, so I'll quickly detail something for you here that's really important to check when your rushes come in. What you'll see is that you've got the name of the original camera file, and that just came out as a camera file in the original, in the rushes bin. It's now got a little sync attached to it, but that's fine, because what we have over here is a tape name column. And what you should be expecting from a proper set of transcodes from a DIT who knows what they're doing is that this tape name should be populated with the tape names exactly the same way as the rushes bins were. So let's actually just look at that rushes bin now, just to double check that. So our name and our tape name column, they line up exactly. The reason for that is this process of onlining at the end. So we are about to change, oop, nearly got my cup over. We are about to change a bunch of names, but we still want to have that metadata somewhere embedded in our process, so that we can get back to the original camera masters at the end. And this tape name column is what's going to do that for you. If it doesn't come in, you can also duplicate the name tab. If I do Command D, you can duplicate it to Labrol. I'll often do that as a sort of safety measure, because when you do an EDL right at the end, you can either point it towards the tape function, or you can point it towards Labrol as well if you want to. So that's a good way of kind of backing that up. What you'll find is you can change Labrol really easily. So I could write that there and completely mess up that Labrol, but with the tape name, you actually can't. So I can't physically change that in any way, shape or form, unless I go into, I have to go through a really laborious process in order to change that. And that's because it wants to be as watertight as possible. And it doesn't want me to be able to change the tape name willy-nilly, because you don't want to be able to do that, basically. Unless you really, really know what you're doing and you really have a really good reason for it, such as metadata is wrong. Okay, and what I would basically want to go through here is I want to be changing the names of my sync files, not necessarily the originals, although we can change it. We can change this name column at whatever time we like, because we have this tape name here. But personally, when I edit or when I'm assisting on something, I like to be able to press match frame on a sync clip and have it bring up the exact card and clip name without me having to then go into the bin to find it, because sometimes people will ask, oh, what card and clip was that? And if I can do that really quickly and easily, that's kind of ideal for me. Anyway, I'm going to go to this, I'm I'm going to go to this, the board at the start of this sync clip. And what I can see here is that it is from scene 9, it's slate 25, and it's take 1, okay? So this is the point at which you would liaise heavily with your editor and ask them, how do you like your stuff named? They might want something really involved, or they might want something as simple as possible. Some editors like the scene names to be first and foremost. Some of them like the slate names to come first and then the scene names to be afterwards. I personally prefer the scene names. So we'll pretend that we've liaised very heavily with our editor, yours truly. And I'm going to say scene 09 underscore slate 25. And I am going to write the whole thing out. So I'm going to take 1. There we go. And so on and so forth on through the rushes. Until you have like a complete, you basically have renamed everything in accordance with what's there. You will also be checking this as you go against the script supervisor's notes, so you can see that you actually do have everything. Okay, I'm going to close this really quickly because I'm going to Blue Peter this and say, here's one I've done earlier. So those are my synced in free rushes. I'm going to put this one to one side. Here we go. So sync day 3. So these ones I actually have checked and they actually are in sync, and I've gone through and done my my sync, I've checked my clap that it's fully down, and I've also gone through and I've put a little locator. Personally, I like it both on the clap, but most editors just want it when they say action. Okay, so they say action. There you go. And you can find those in, if we go into tools and then command palette, where are you? Command palette. You can map those to your keyboard if you want. If you go to the more tab, you can add markers to anywhere you like. So you can see I've kind of dragged and dropped one over here. I'll actually just change that really quickly now to yellow, just to kind of show you how that works. And I also have certain, like I say, we're going to breeze past this, I'm sorry, because you know, I could show you how to do all that, but we haven't got a huge amount of time. So I've got it mapped to be able to kind of go through my my rush, like skip really quickly through the markers as well if I want to. When you have a complete bin of sync rushes, sorry, I've just brought up the Q&A by mistake. We'll get to those questions at the end. I would then siphon these off into scene bins. So scene, we'll call this scene, we see we've got some from scene 2. So scene, here we go. And I might reorder those by scene as well. And then I am going to drag and drop everything that's associated with scene 2. I'm going to hold down Alt in order to copy rather than move. And you'll see that it kind of keeps them in the sync bin, but it also moves them into the scene bin as well. And then I would basically go through it. And this is, again, a point at which you want to be liaising heavily with your editor. So I'm going to order these by, I'm going to order them by name because I want them to go by name. You can see there's something here that also belongs to slate 5, to scene 5. I'll go to that in a second. Once you've got those in, you then want to go over to this little icon here, which is kind of the frame view. I then want to be, as long as I've put these in the right order within the name column, I then want to press Command L to make these as big as I can. And then I'm going to go, I'm going to right click and say fill sorted. And that's going to fill all of these the way that I want it to be, basically. You'll find also, because these are ones I made earlier, it didn't, the frame view is already, I've already kind of organized this, if that makes sense. Just move this one out of the way slightly. And then what you want to be doing is asking the editor how they want this to be presented to them. In my case, I would say, look, I would like each slate to be in a different row. So you'll see 25 take 1, the full start, and then take 2 and take 3 here.
You then want, let's move the rest of these down a little bit, and then I'm going to start siphoning these off by, in accordance with the slate number, so they can see really clearly, take 1, 2, 3, take 1, 2, etc., etc., 3, 4, all in a line. And so on and so forth until you have a tidy, complete bin. So I've got, there's take 4 there. 3 takes in that slate. 1, 2, 3 here as well. 1, 2, 3 here. And then with this lot, so move these all down. 36 take 1. Yeah, let's just finish this and do it properly, okay? And I would say to my assistant, I would say, I would like them spaced out 5 across to make it really clear, and then I want them in order. I also tend to like things to be 38 take 1. I can see here as well that we're actually missing a take, which is concerning, and that is something that I would consult with the script notes about that. But it might just be that they have sometimes, what you'll find is that they've actually mislabeled something. So I can see I've got 38 take 1. What happens if I match frame this back to the camera rushes? So that is A21C001. And I can see here, okay, so that is labeled up as slate 3. So A021C003. So there's a clip missing in between those. And that's the sort of thing that as an assistant editor, you would want to be looking out for. So why is there a clip missing? Is that because you've left it out? Is that because the DIT hasn't left it out, and hasn't provided you with everything? So this is the point at which you would just check this sort of thing and be on the lookout for that sort of error, because that is the sort of thing that you want to catch before it gets to your editor. Or at least if you give it to your editor, you have a clear explanation. Or if something really is missing, you say, look, I've already contacted the DIT the DIT about this missing clip, and I will let you know when there's an outcome on that, and make sure you do follow that up. Okay. Now, if I press Command T, that tidies my bin up quite nicely. What your editor might also want is they might want a roll with everything in it. In which case you want to be double checking that there aren't any endpoints here. As we've seen, like I've kind of already done some of this, so some of the process. So really at the start of this process, this bin will look, the rushes in this bin will look similar to what these original camera rushes look like, i.e. they will all have clapper boards at the start. Nobody really wants to see that. What the editor actually wants is a frame that is a little bit more in line with what you're, with kind of the action that takes place in the clip. They may even instruct you to have the first take in this action reflect the very start of the take, and then the next few files for you to wind them on, which I'm doing by pressing the number 2. Okay. To wind them on a little bit. Okay, this one is a false start, so I don't have to. And then this one I am going to wind on to the very, very end of the action when this guy storms off. And the same here on this one, I'm going to show the start of the action at this clip. And then it's going to progressively get further and further through the action, so that the editor might, that's basically, if they want that, they might want to see kind of the action that takes place there. Okay, so basically the big thing to take away from this is that you want to be constantly communicating with your editor and doing everything the way that they want it. Don't just do things the way that you are used to doing them. Do the rushes the way that they like it, and the way that, because the way that they have asked for their scene bin will be what they like in terms of how their brain works, and the easiest way for them to sift through the material. So that's very, very important. And yes, what the other thing that some editors tend to like is that they like a little reel at the very top of the bin that has every take in it. So what you would want to do is, if you have gone through the clip and kind of put any markers in to kind of enable you to achieve these little frames, you want to make sure that you go through and either remove them by pressing G, or you press T to highlight and into out on the entire clip, you want to make sure that your player head, see this little blue line here, you want to make sure that's right at the beginning if you're pressing G. And then you kind of basically want to open up your, in your composer window, you want to have that timeline open, and then you want to Alt and drag everything into it. Now, this is going to come out with the wrong timing for us here because I actually haven't gone through all of those clips and deselected the in to out points. But we're going to make believe that we have. You'll see here, this is how I would check it basically. I would highlight everything except that sequence, then I would go to bin info. It's going to come up on console with the duration of the items in the bin. And then if I then either go to bin info for just this one item, or if I go back into my my list view, you can see the duration there is nowhere near it. It's 18 minutes. So let's just pretend that's another mistake that we've made and we've had to correct it. And what you would then have to do is go through the whole thing and check where you went wrong, okay? The last stage that I do, and this is again where you want to be checking with your editor, is that me, for my own personal peace of mind, to make sure that I know that I've given every single clip over to the editor, when I have a scene bin that I've got ready, I will then color code those clips differently from how they were originally in the scene bin. So that is where you really want to ask your editor what they're happy with, because they might have certain colors that they like to use for other things. And they might have certain colors that really offend them when they look at it on the timeline, that they might not want that garish green that we had for that original batch. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click here and I'm going to select blue. Another fun thing that's happened in Avid in the last few versions actually is if you hold down Alt and right click, it brings up a whole bunch of different options. So I'm going to pick this nice little, let's go for turquoise. Great. Now I can see in my sync bin that all of those clips have been processed, they've been marked up, and they have been provided to the editor. I'm also, sorry, just going to quickly wind this frame on in the sequence wheel. And then I'm going to either let the editor know that that scene is available to them, if we're working in the same project, or potentially what you might have to do is do reveal file, find the bin, which will look like this in an Avid project. It's whatever you've named the bin, and then with a little .avb file extension at the end. And you might need to copy that into the editor's individual projects, which is a really good segue to us looking at what a project looks like on a Finder level. So as you can see here, each of these big folders, this is where I keep my Avid projects on my individual machine. You want to make sure that you're keeping your Avid projects similar to how this applies to Premiere as well, I believe. You want to keep this somewhere separate to where you're keeping your rushes. So I will keep my projects on my machine, and I will keep my rushes on an external hard drive usually. You can see as well that each of these projects basically it's indistinguishable really from any other type of folder, which is why I have a particular naming convention for when I have a project. So I name it in all caps. I will also usually write the frame rate attached to the project so that I can see, we'll see why in just a moment actually. You can't open something in, you can't open the timeline that's 25 frames a second in a 24 frames a second project without it modifying that. So if you have something that you want to bring in from another project, it's really, really handy to see what the frame rate is that you've set this project up in, okay? And you'll see that that's the original project, the AJ Ingsy resupply at 24 frames a second, because I actually originally set this project up in the wrong frame rate. So you can't do that in Avid, unfortunately. Well, it's fortunate because it makes you be accurate, basically. So that's essentially a scene bin, kind of a whistle-stop tour of how to mark up your rushes. Hopefully by the end of that, you would also then have siphoned off your scene 4, your scene 6, 10, etc. And then you will have a complete bin of rushes that are all that nice little turquoise color. Actually, one of the editors I'm working with at the moment, she has me do odd numbers in one color and even numbers in another, so that she then, when she opens up her timeline, it's all beautifully, she can see when one scene ends really clearly and another one begins. Okay, the one thing that that doesn't cover, because that's a single camera setup, is it doesn't cover group clipping, which is something that you might have to do quite a lot when it comes to something that, if you've got a project where there's multiple cameras shooting at once, so you'll often have an A camera and a B camera shooting at the same time, and sometimes even a C camera or a D camera. I think in one of Shane Meadows' jobs, he used 16 cameras at once, which is, which is joyous. I have here some, this is all offline, so let me just rearrange my drive really quickly, because those are some media files that pertain to another thing. So I'm going to put my Avid media files back in here. Basically, the way I've laid this out is that anytime I go into a different project, I just bring out the Avid media files that are associated with that project. And because I color coded those, I was able to put those back in really, really easily. So I have this media for training. Here we go. And hopefully this should all come online. Great, wonderful. Is that all? Okay, wonderful. So now these are actually files from an actual, it's from an actual feature film that I worked on last year. So I've actually had to run these through, and the film's not out yet. Or maybe it was meant to be out, but it's not out because of coronavirus. So I'm gonna duplicate this into this scene bin, and then I'm going to order them by name. And what we'll see here is that while most of these slates have, they just have, you know, a regular A camera. You can see it even in the take column on the side here. It's got A, and then there's a few takes that have B camera. So you've got take one, and this is something that I would be looking at my script report about. Is there meant to be a B camera for this take as well? But I've already verified that there isn't. But here we've got take one, we've got take two and bit three both have B cams. So I'm going to put these in, or I'm going to make these big again by pressing Command L. I'm going to fill sorted so that they filter in the way that they like. And as you can see here, let me just delete these really quickly. As you can see, I've kind of blurred them out. So I've run these through a few different, through Resolve in order to do this. So it's actually kind of lost a lot of the metadata. So we're going to have to do this manually. But you would want to be asking your editor, do you want things group clipped? If you want them group clipped according to A and B camera, do you then also want the original camera files in the bin as well? Not the original camera files, but the original sync clips in the bin as well. So I'm just going to arrange this now quickly. So I've got slate 558 there at the top, which has take one. It's got take two in both A and B camera, and take three in both A and B camera. And then I'm going to arrange the rest of these just according to slate in just a moment. So what I want to be doing here is I've gone through, I've checked that everything is hunky-dory there. Great. I can't remember if I've left the media intact for the, oh yes, this one is MOS. So I think this one has a mistake, because what you can see here is there is, you can see that there's only V1 available to us here. And this is something that, again, this should ring alarm bells for you as an assistant editor, because what you have here is a clip that isn't sunk to any audio, and there's no corresponding audio for it. But what you see here is there's a clapper loader. If this scene was intended to be silent and without any sound recorded at the same time, they should be holding that clapper up with the sticks down to begin with, to indicate to you that this is MOS. But what we see here is we actually do have a clap. And not only do we have a clap for this take one, we also have another clapper loader in the back doing the clap for the B camera. So what we can see is that there's actually a file missing here. We'll pretend that that's not the case, again, in our sort of make-believe for this session. But so let's focus on the actual group clipping. But just this is kind of a good exercise in all this, some of the things that can go wrong. Okay, so there we go. Again, that's actually not really in sync, but that's we'll pretend that it is. You can see that those sticks aren't fully down. Or maybe I could, before I blurred it, actually see that there's the actual ends of the sticks are in. Okay, cool. And here's our B camera. Again, let's go through, and you can see the waveforms. These are really helpful in this case. That's the first stick. So you see those waveforms that have the sticks that appear. I can see a lot of you asking questions on the Q&A. Okay, I'm just double checking that any of those are okay. That's cool. It's nobody who's confused about things that are immediate. I'll get to those in a bit. So that first clap that you can see with the waveform, that was the A camera. And you'll see they'll even call that out. So they'll say mark it, and then this will go down, and that is in sync. So that's great. So what we want to do is find, we probably want to use the first stick. So I'm going to put an endpoint there, and I'm going to make sure my endpoint is on my A sticks as well. I'm going to highlight both of those, and in this little menu bit where we originally found our sync, our auto sync, we would then go to group clips, and then you'll see there are far fewer options available to you, because you should be grouping clips that are already sunk, so that you don't have all those options that were available to us when we originally tried to sync, such as how many tracks you want sunk at the same time. So here we go, endpoints. I am going to say yes to that. And what that gives us is a little group clip here that you can essentially, if I go into, I've got this little quad split icon here in my composer window, and what I can see, I can check that both the sticks kind of line up, that's fine. And then I go through to my next one. I can see that that is going, sometimes you don't have the luxury of this dual view available to you if the cameras are quite far away, but you can check that the action at least happens in the same way. I'm going to turn my caps lock off so you can't really hear, but what we want to be seeing, does the action kind of happen in the same way in both of those clips? Yes, I can say safely that that does. So I'm just going to tidy up this name and call that GRP. And I'm also going to kind of wind the frame on a little bit so that it kind of reflects the action a little bit better. And I'm actually going to do that with all of these clips as well. Same thing here with this group clip. So I want to find where those sticks are and go, turn my caps lock back on. Okay. So that actually is out of sync, but again, we're going to pretend that it's not. This will have been something that I will have picked up initially. Oh, okay, hang on, this is interesting. So this is a good example of when you don't want to be using the first stick. So this camera clearly only started rolling after the A camera clapped. So what we want to be doing is go to our next set of sticks that correspond the next waveform. There we go. And then we want to be doing the same on our B camera. Boom. Put an endpoint there, and then I want to highlight both of those, go group clips by endpoints, great. Then I want to check my action by going to the quad split and watching to see if the same thing happens at the same time. And then I want to be winding my frame on. I'm satisfied that the rest of that has only got a cam on everything. Okay, and then 61, 62, move these down, make room for this extra slate. And then I will go through obviously and mark those up for the editor, and I will wind all of these frames on so that they reflect the action a little bit better. I then want to be asking my editor, how do you want us to handle that? Do you want us to, okay, let's wind these until we find the action. Cool. So I want to be asking my editor, how do you want this? Do you want both the group clips and the sync clips in the bin? Some of your editors, depending on how they might like to work, they might want it. Here we go. With the group clips, just kind of one of the editors that I'm working with at the moment has his group clips kind of like this. So they'll basically be A, B, A, B, A, B, and then the group clips just kind of sit neatly between them. I actually did see somebody ask something about reels there, so I'm actually just going to address something to do with reels that pertains to these group clips really quickly. If I was asking for this scene personally, I would ask for all of my let's pretend that we've got an editor who doesn't like all the individual clips. So once I've grouped those, I'm happy to leave those to one side. And then all they have to look at in the bin, it's very clean and easy. They've got take 1, take 2, and take 3, and then each of the ones that have multiple camera action just have that built into the clip naturally. And yeah, so all that will very, very much depend on who your editor is and how they work. So I'm going to highlight everything except my sequence itself, and then alt and drag that in. The third block editor that I'm working with at the moment likes to have his group clips duplicated. So I've done that by basically highlighting with my segment tool, which is the little red arrow on the side, and holding down Shift. And then if you want to move something up on a timeline without letting it shift left or right, you basically hold down Command and Shift, and that will go up. If you then want to duplicate that, if I press Alt, that will add a little plus sign, and that will duplicate that for me. So if I go through here, what I will find that I've got A camera there, and if I want to turn V2 to B camera, all I have to do is, oops, not that, press Shift down, and that will, the way that my keyboard is set up is that it will cycle through all the options available to it in a group clip. So if I want to cycle through that, that applies to when you start cutting as well. If you want to cycle through the options that you have available to you on a group clip, you can actually just use the group clip up and down function. So the editor that I was saying I was working with, he, I'll see if I can grab basically he has those on a timeline, and then he also has a split screen function for his A and B cameras. So the A goes into the center of the screen smaller and goes to the left, and then the B goes to the right. I kind of want to breeze past that very quickly, if that's okay with you all, because I don't want to run out of time. In fact, we're very, very unlikely to be able to go through turnovers, but very briefly, what I'm going to do here quickly is open up a timeline from the job I'm on at the moment. Okay, great. And what we're going to find is that everything, oh no, I can't do that in a second because it's at a different frame rate. Let me go out of this project in that case. Great. It's literally going to open up every single bin, isn't it? Yeah, there we go. So what you can see from this locked timeline is that everything is offline. What I'm going to do quickly is, and that's exactly what I want, because maybe you should be looking at this stuff. I'm going to turn off the offline in the clip color, and I'm going to go to source. And so we can see what a locked episode timeline might look like. And so what you want to be doing with your finished timeline, actually probably the best thing for me to do, you can see that it's kind of split into different layers of drama. There's VFX layers as well. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually show you the finalized timeline from the short film, because then I can actually show you how these things work. So I'm just going to unplug my external hard drive, and I am going to plug in the actual master hard drive for this job, that actually has all of my media intact, not just stuff I've loaded in there. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go to the timeline. Okay, I'm going to call this bin turnovers, and I'm going to go to the assembly that we have locked. We haven't locked this at all, but we'll pretend that we have. And what you'll see here is that I have my finalized timeline. Everything's intact. So what I want to be providing to, oh, this is a great example because this is all over the shop. What I want to be providing, at least the audio is extremely tidy. What I want to be providing, I want to be communicating and liaising, and this is kind of why I'm not going to go hugely into turnovers, because a lot of it, the settings and so on, depend upon the post house that you are liaising with. They will have their own spec sheets, that detail kind of how they want them done. So basically, don't take anything I say here as this is the way to do it necessarily, but I just want to kind of introduce you to a few concepts. So what we need to provide the audio people with and what we need to provide the video people with are different things. Video, in order to conform this from these DNX HD36 files all the way back to the original camera rushes, are two main things. So we need an EDL, which stands for Edit Decision List, and then we need an AAF to give them. AAF stands for Advanced Authoring Format, and it kind of actually, some people, if you get somebody really old school, they might call it an OMF, because it kind of, the SD version of that would be an OMF, which kind of comes from audio days. The ADL is a really, really rudimentary document that kind of details in a way that you could open it up in text and read it and reconstruct it. What exactly is going on the timeline at any given moment. This timeline I'm not going to be able to really EDL quickly because, as you can see, there's files kind of just scattered about all over the place, which is often what happens when there's kind of a music related project. So what I want to be doing is going through this timeline and tidying it up, making sure that there's nothing extraneous. So I want to make sure this file from the top layer here will supersede whatever goes underneath it. So I don't need what goes underneath it. And I'm going to go through and move all of those files down. You want to, I'm doing this very quickly because I made this timeline, because I made it. You want to be doing this extremely, extremely carefully when you go through an editor's timeline, and make sure that what you think that you've understood is the top layer isn't just kind of an alt take or anything like that, okay? So basically you go through a timeline and you break it down. I tend to do my EDLs, I tend to do my AAFs first because they don't require you to, when you export an AAF, it will actually duplicate the timeline, and then you can check that that kind of exported correctly and make the EDL from that. Let's pretend we've gone through this whole thing and broken down the layers correctly, which, as you can see, is anything but the case, especially when you get over to all this nonsense over here. But what I'm going to do to make the EDL, let's pretend V1 is, that's kind of the most straightforward one, isn't it? So if I go to Tools and then List Tool, that's going to bring up List Tool, which is, that's how you make your EDLs. I've got some presets here, so file 32, I'll explain what that is in just a moment. I'm going to load my sequence. I'm going to deselect all the layers that I don't want to export. So I don't particularly want to export any audio layers because this isn't for an audio team yet. I'm just going to do V1. Before I hit preview, I'm going to go over to list options. I'm going to check what options, and this will depend on your post house. I definitely want my source file name, which was that take name column. I don't want my markers. I don't want clip columns. Frame count, sure, why not? And then I want to make sure that it is in A mode, and that the real ID it's pointing to is the source file type. Now remember when we looked at that bin, and I mentioned that if the metadata and the tape name column was wrong, you can then point that to the lab role. You can duplicate the tape name to the lab role, which is a little bit more easily destructible, but it still works as in a pinch. This is where you would then point your EDL to if that were what you were using as the backup option, okay? But here we know that our tape name column was completely perfectly done. I'm then going to press preview, and that is going to populate this EDL for me. I then want to go through and check that my sources are all fine. Basically, because it's what I'm expecting here to find is only just the camera rushes, basically nothing else. And then I'm going to save the list to one file. Let's just save it to our desktop. Let's get rid of this messy naming convention. Save that. Okay. Now, no, I don't want to save the settings. Thank you very much. Now, if I go over to my desktop to where I've exported this EDL, you'll see this opens up in text. No, I don't really want that to open up in text. I kind of want it to open up in just plain old. Oh, never mind. Okay, fine. We'll open it in text, mate. So what you'll see here is you've got a whole bunch of different numbers, and those are they're called events in an EDL. And each of those pertains to something that happens on the timeline. And each of these columns refers to, in turn, where this camera file and its subsequent clip name, where the in point on that is. So we can see that we decided to cut that in at the time code 23284213. And then it lasts until the out point 23284519. So that's the time of day code that we saw in those camera rushes. And then the third and the fourth column pertain to where exactly does that sit on the timeline. So what you will find is that these numbers dance about all over the place depending on where you've taken them from. But these third and fourth columns pertain to kind of literally just sequentially where that fits on the timeline. So there we go. It should finish at 9:13 and then go to 9:13. They should be subsequent to each other. So you see these two match, these two match, these two match. And really what you should be able to do with one of these, if you really had to, is you should be able to look at this and read it and go to each of those camera files and cut them back into the timeline at those time codes if you really needed to and nothing else was working. As you can imagine, if you ever had to do that, it would usually be a pretty nightmarish scenario, but it has happened to me before. So that is how you read an EDL, and it gives you the information that you need. An AAF is a slightly different type of document. Let's do one for video now. So we just want to put an in point and an out point at the start and end of our timeline. And we want to highlight only the video layers because we're producing a video AAF at the moment. This one we will do output, export to file. And basically what this file will do, that EDL that you saw, that was really just a kind of rudimentary list of all the files that are involved in at what time codes. What an AAF will do is when you bring it into Flame or Resolve or a similar piece of software, it will actually completely reconstruct this timeline, including any effects within your timeline. So a rule of thumb for me is I leave in an AAF, I will leave off any color effects, because usually this is for when it goes to grade. You don't want to be giving them color effects, but you want to leave every single other type of effect in there. So I'm going to, when I break this down for the online, I will go through and I'll check each single file to see if there's any effects on it, and then if there's any effects within effects within effects, I will want to be checking those as well. Okay. So I'm going to export that as a visual AAF. There's some options available to me. I only want to do a video one. I want to use my marks and my selected tracks and my AAF protocol. And what I want to, crucially, there's a few different ways of exporting an AAF. I want to link to the media. I don't want it exporting this media because this media is the transcode media that we're cutting with. It's the DNX HD36. It's those really low res files, and we don't want it to try and reconstruct it from that. We want them to link back to the originals, okay? So I'm going to save that, and it's going to export me a nice little AAF. I'm going to quickly check our Q&A in case there's anything. Somebody says, I didn't catch how you created the reel in which you then dragged the clips. Sorry, to create a timeline, you basically just you right click in the bin and you say create new timeline. And then you lasso everything that you want to put in that timeline in order. And you hold down Alt and you drag it in. There we go. Why does the timeline start at 01 rather than 00? You can actually make the timeline start at any point that you want to. I think Avid defaults to 01. But what you'll find that people often ask for when it comes to an actual professional sort of proper film or TV show, is that they will specify that they want it to start at, they want the first frame of picture to start at 10 hours. So what I'll actually have is usually like a 10-second countdown. So I will start my time code for the sequence at 09:59 50:00 and let it run through until that very first frame hits at 10 on the dot. And I've also worked on a job that actually wanted each episode in turn. It wanted each episode in turn to come through with subsequent numbers. So it wanted episode 1 at 10 hours, it wanted episode 2 at 20 hours, it wanted episode 3 at 30 hours, and so on and so forth. I have never actually turned over a feature film. I know that when you do a feature film, you break it into reels. So there might be other things that different post houses specify to do with time codes on those. And also when you work on episodic television where there's part breaks, if you've got that sort of a thing and it's not a BBC job, they will often ask for each part break to start at a round second, so you'll have to put a bunch of filler on the timeline. So let's look at that AAF file. We can't actually open it up, but you can see kind of how it turns out. Now, unlike the EDL, which you can open to check that it's kind of done all right, you can't open this up to check it unless you have those original camera masters and you want to open this up in Resolve. So when I export a visual AAF, I will often actually just add, and I should have probably done this when I exported it, but I will add visual, because as you'll see in a second, there's nothing to distinguish visual from an audio AAF. If I go into this little exported file, by the way, it's only going to open up the file, the tracks that it's exported. So we've got V1 to V5 there, and that's an easy way for you to check that it's exported the right things and that you haven't missed anything out. Now I'm going to do an audio AF now. I've already got my in to out points on, and an audio AF is very different. Sometimes you actually might want to ask them if they want their the effects removed as well, by the way, just as a side note. Now what you're going to see when we export this audio, now audio is very different from the way that we've been handling the camera files. Export audio AAF. The camera files, because they work off transcodes, but the audio doesn't carry the same amount of data with it. So when you export these, you can actually just export the media the way it is. So in this one, I want to include audio tracks in sequence. I want to hit consolidate media, and I want to give it some frames, some handles, which basically means that it's not only going to just give the people on the audio side of things the clips as they are on the sequence, but it's going to give you some frames on either side to play with if they need to kind of ramp it up or kind of fade it in or out or anything like that. So I'm going to give it 60 frames. This post house that you are using will specify that to you. I'm going to convert them to waves, and I'm going to keep the audio sample and bit depth, sample rate and bit depth to the same as the project. And then I want to embed those in the AAF so that the audio is completely reconstructed on the back end. So you'll see what happens when I go to export this. And in this case, I'm actually going to do I'm going to call this audio.aaf to just, destination is not currently available. Well, that's great, isn't it? Here we go. Let me just check if anything is offline. Click color. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but let's just do a section of the timeline as a sort of safe bet to show you what that would look like whenever you export it, okay? Oh, that's a mixed line, that's why. There we go. So if I deselect my Atmos track, and I select just the music track instead, I can then export that safely. No, I can't. Never mind. Okay. Well, that part of the demo's failed, but you get the picture. I kind of just wanted to give you an introduction to kind of how what some of the turnovers are that you will be dealing with. When you get your trainee role, you'll go through this in much greater depth, and your first assistant will be detailing how they want that done, basically, and they will be the one who's designing the workflow. They'll be liaising with their post house, checking through their spec, and basically making decisions about the settings to use in each of those turnovers. Also, everything that I've shown you in terms of syncing is also it's basically, it's fine. Like they might also have their own ways to do that, if that makes sense. I did really want to briefly talk about soft skills, because I know we want, there's some Q&As, and we said we would kind of try and wind this up by 10, didn't we, Mia? But I just want to kind of briefly run you through some of the things that you need to know as an assistant editor that are as important, if not more so, than your than the actual technical skills. Because actually, if you are in this because you want to edit, there will be a day when you move into the editor's chair where you can forget all about all this stuff. You can forget all about you know, the technical side of things. I know editors who don't even know how to do an EL anymore. But just really briefly to touch upon, the soft skills are going to be important throughout your career. So the role of an editor is really, really important in terms of you have huge amounts of leadership skills available that you need to draw upon. When I got my first sort of runner job in a post house, you know, I sent them through my CV. I sent my show reel for little things that I'd cut along the way and things like that. And very wisely, they didn't look at it at all. They didn't care about that. And the reason why is what they explained to me is that, you know, you can learn all the technical skills that you want, but what's kind of harder sometimes is they want to look for somebody who can manage a room, who has not necessarily charisma. It's not necessarily what you need, and it doesn't matter if you're an introvert as well. You can still tap into this if you aren't a particularly outgoing person. But just be aware that you will need to sort of steward the atmosphere of a room. Sometimes as an editor, there will be you know, there's sometimes might be tension. There might be creative differences, and you know, you have to present things in a really good way to execs all the time and things like that. So the soft skills are really, really important. So your job, and how I regard it as an assistant editor, is that your job is to support your editor. Your job, your first point of loyalty is really to your editor. So so basically, what that means is that you are basically trying to take as much weight off their shoulders, and you're also trying to communicate to them subtly and humbly that you really know what you're doing and that they are in safe hands. Because an editor is building their career really upon the idea that they can work with the same people over and over again. They want to be able to work with the same directors and the same producers. And if their head is half in the game and half wondering if the assist team is functioning correctly, it's very difficult to be fully creative. Or also if they're worried that you might mess something up and show them up and make them look silly by not giving them all the material that has been shot, for example, it leads to a tense situation for them. So really, that way to communicate that to them is to do everything really, really well, and to dot every I and cross every T, and make sure that everything is that your naming conventions are consistent across your projects, so that they know that you have attention to detail. And even if they're the sort of person who says that they don't really care about that sort of thing, they don't care if everything's marked up, or they don't care if everything is spelled correctly or anything like that. If you do those things, then subconsciously they just can relax and know that they're in safe hands, essentially. So basically, the other angle to think about that as well is that your loyalty is, of course, first and foremost to your editor. So if anyone's asking to see something, or if they're asking to see an assembly of something that your editor might not necessarily be ready to send out yet, you always want to check in with them first if it's okay to send anything. And it's so that you're not kind of going behind their back and sending something or that somebody's asked for, that they're not ready to show, or they're working on with their director behind the scenes, and they're not quite ready for it to see the light of day yet. It's always courteous to check with them before anything leaves the edit suite. And thinking about all of this from the standpoint of where you are at the beginning of your careers, your editor, your loyalty should be to your editor, but via your first assistant editor. So see what you can do to take weight off their shoulder, do your job well for them, so they know that they can just leave things with you and it'll be done well. And communicate to them, take that off their shoulders. Remember as well, I've been very fortunate to work with some really great second assistants, and the best ones are ones that kind of show a lot of initiative, and kind of, if there's problems that come up, they try and find solutions for them. The second assistant I'm working with at the moment, for example, he knew that I was really trying to find a solution to a particular problem, and he went off and researched that for me, so I didn't actually really need to kind of devote too much brain space to it. Be aware as well, if you're first assistant, if you're a trainee and or you're a second assistant, and your first assistant is in a position where they want to edit eventually, they might be looking for opportunities to try and assemble scenes and to try and do cuts of promos and things like that. And if you can take some of the slightly more mundane aspects of the job, such as doing rushes every day, off of their hands, that would be a huge help to them. And then they'll recognise that, and they'll know that you're kind of a reliable person. They might bring you onto their next job with them and that sort of thing. I've put here, read the room, never interrupt a screening. That is, I actually should have put that first. That's kind of the first rule of Fight Club of assisting. And this applies to some of you if you're runners as well. One of the most important things is to never interrupt a screening. If you have to go into your editor's room or knock for them, just have a little listen outside the door first, and make sure that they're not in the middle of playing through an episode or playing through the stuff that they're showing their clients, because you could really deflate a room. It might be the very first time that they've shown that to somebody, the very first time they've shown it to the producers, and there's a lot riding on that moment, and you don't want to deflate that by going in and offering teas, even if that's a really nice thing as well. So have a little listen outside to see if it's an appropriate time for you to knock for them before you interrupt, okay? Don't fake it till you make it. Okay, very important in the way that you conduct yourself is don't blag anything, tempting as it may be. If you don't know how to do the role yet, don't advertise yourself as a second assistant editor. Advertise yourself as a trainee or a post PA or a post-production runner. It might end up being fine for you to land a role that you're not quite ready for, and it's a chill job, and it's fine for you to just figure it out as you go along. But if your CV lands across somebody's desk, and often it'll land across somebody's desk, and if you build yourself as a second assistant editor, but you don't know Avid and you don't know each of these processes really well that I've just spoken about, what could be happening is it might be a really busy and intense period on a job, and the first assistant has asked for help, and everyone else they know is unavailable, and they're just like, great, let's just get this person in. And this has happened to me before. I was desperately wanting a spare pair of hands on a really stressful and busy job, and we got someone on last minute who said they knew Avid. They didn't know Avid, or they did, but they didn't really know it well enough to be a second assistant. And I've never wanted to rip my own head off so much in my entire life. Not only was I not getting the help I really desperately, in fact, I could have done with 2 extra people. It was so busy. But now I have to train somebody. Like, this is not the time for that. So don't do that. If you do that, you are actually screwing somebody over, and you'll probably get fired. Let's talk networking really quickly. That was a bit of a downer. And I really want people to know that. So this also sounds like it could be a downer based on how many people don't really like it, but I actually want to really encourage you on it, because, and I want to demystify what that is for you as well. Networking, if you can make friends, you can network, okay? It's not a case of like smoozing around a room and being really corny or anything like that. It's a case of just building community, really, and getting to know people, getting to know your peers, getting to know the people who are one step above you, and having that kind of interchange. People tend to like people asking them things sometimes. It's not a huge imposition on them, and it might be for you that if you want to go along to some of the events that they have, like such as Blue Collar Post Collective, they do a monthly meetup. Hugely daunting, even for an extrovert like myself, the first time you go into a room full of faces that you don't know. But the more you go, the more you'll start to see the same sorts of faces, and then you can start to make friends, just have a little catch up. And then slowly, you've built your network. Another good thing to do is to reach out to people that you admire, and do your research and find what try and hunt down the email addresses of the people that you've worked who've worked on things that you really, really like, and then just ask them for some advice over email, or ask them for coffee, and just meet them that way. And if you're much more comfortable just meeting people one-on-one, you can totally do it that way as well. And not everyone's going to get back to you. We have a very busy we're in a very busy industry, so don't take it personally, and don't give it up either. But do start to do that sort of thing, and that is how you would start to build your network. So if the industry seems you're really on the outside looking in and you don't have a clue where to start, like just start somewhere. Look at the shows that you like, who has made them, who are the assistants on that, who were the post-production supervisors, the post-production coordinators. Can you find a way to get their email address or their contact details in a legitimate fashion? Don't just like ask somebody because if you've got somebody's email address because you've worked with them, you should never then give that out to people. But if they've legitimately just put their contact details up on the Knowledge, for example, which is a great place to start, and that's perfectly legitimate for you to then get in touch with them. You know, if you see people on Facebook who are kind of a bit further ahead, then you're welcome to kind of, sometimes I've messaged people and gone, hey, I saw that you did Les Mis, I really like that. Can we have a chat about that or something like that? And that is that's kind of how you do it. Nia, do you want to throw open some questions?
Hi. Yes, we actually have only got about 10 minutes though, Aideen, and you've done incredibly well actually, because you've gone through a lot of them yourself, haven't you, through kind of the last hour. So someone's asking what the difference is between edit assistant and assistant editor. I don't think you've covered that yet.
I haven't covered that, you're right. So the difference between an edit assistant and an assistant editor is basically an edit assistant would be more somebody who's in-house in a post-house, so you might be internal. An assistant editor is more of a supportive role for an editor. So I think the edit assistant would be more of a technical role. It's definitely a great place to start, but I would definitely, I think the term assistant editor is probably more highly regarded in the industry than even if you might be doing slightly more technical things as an edit assistant. But yeah, it's a very good place to start.
Okay, great. There is a couple of people asking whether the recording is going to be on the Rough Assembly website and available. Yes, it is. So, and this one's going to be on there, and also the other like 6 that we've put on since lockdown or something like that. They're all on the Rough Assembly website, which is www.theroughassembly. Is it .com?
I don't know.
I think so.
Roughassembly.com, yeah.
Is Eleanor here? Eleanor. But I've put it in the chat function for everyone, and all of the recordings are on there. Okay, tips on how to get trainee assistant editor jobs.
Interesting. So I started out in a post house and I became a runner there, and then they take on runners in order to kind of train them up into those roles, and that's how I did it. But it kind of took about 6 months, and which I see somebody else is asking there. But that's how you get that kind of trainee role. Sometimes it's in-house is often a really good way to start, but then it kind of gets difficult to kind of then branch out from that secure job into the world of freelancing. I think that I kind of worked my way up there, and then I moved straight into first assisting from there, so it's hard for me to really speak to that. But what I've seen people do is there's trainee schemes, certainly Screen Skills, and Sarah Putt has a scheme as well. And then the other way is really just getting in touch with post-production supervisors and getting in touch with first assistant editors. Those are the people who will be doing the hiring. Like if we need a trainee on my job, it'll usually be me who does the hiring. So it's first assistant editors that you want to be getting in touch with, not necessarily to ask for a job, but just to build your network and ask for some advice and that sort of thing. And then they might think of you next time they hear about somebody who's looking for a trainee.
Yeah. Okay. And what's the main difference between the first and second assistant? That's good, isn't it? And also, how do you work your way to the first once you are a second?
Good shout. So you'll kind of know when you're ready. I think it takes a few years. The difference between often there's not a huge difference if they're doing. They're often doing the same sorts of things. So me and my second will share tasks quite a lot, and we'll share rushes and that sort of thing. But often the difference is that the first assistant it's the buck stops with the first assistant. They'll be the first port of call. So, and they have to do all the problem solving really. So, and any of the politics runs through the first assistant. So it's just a greater level of responsibility, and they'll often be the people who are taken from job to job with an editor as well. So you're doing a lot of the same things. It's also important to note that there's a slight difference between how this works in film and how it works in TV drama. In TV drama, you can often be a second assistant not too long after you've been training for maybe 6 months or so. You know, you should be ready to be. It's hard for me to remember back to, because I went in such a different route, but yeah, I'd say like if you've been training for about 6 months, you've probably got the skills to be a second assistant, but it should be a lot longer before you become a first. However, in big feature films, I would say that a second assistant within those jobs should have the skills level of a first within TV drama, or even in indie films. So it's a huge thing whenever you move into that realm.
Yeah. Okay. So this is something that comes up all the time, the difference between Premiere and Avid, and what do people need? Because obviously the schools all teach one, and then the industry seems to kind of mix it all up. So what would be your tips?
So definitely Avid is the industry standard without a shadow of a doubt. That doesn't mean that there aren't Premiere jobs out there that's not worth pursuing them. I know Walter Murch now edits in Premiere, although he's retired, so he doesn't need any assistance, I don't think. And I actually missed out on a job last year because I didn't know, or I didn't feel confident enough to be an assistant. I could cut in Premiere all right, but to actually do all those things and retain all that metadata that you need is a different kettle of fish. So definitely, the reason why is there's nothing wrong with Premiere as an NLE, but for that sort of collaborative thing, you know, it's hard enough, even if you are just like one assistant and one editor, to collaborate in a Premiere project. It's really not designed for that collaborative offline online workflow. It's starting to talk about that, but the fact that even the way that you sync things in Premiere, before they've changed that now, but it used to be merge clips or something like that, and in order to do that you end up losing all your metadata, so you can't actually link back to that at the end or send it on to somebody else. It's not built for that collaborative thing. And certainly if you're working on a big job, on my job we've got 3 editors, we had at one point we had 3 assistants and a trainee, we had a VFX editor. You know, you definitely couldn't do that in Premiere or anything else other than Avid, because it's built for collaborative work, and it's built to be able to send things through. All that stuff I just showed them about the EDLs and the AAFs and all the options available to you, you don't really have, I don't think, unless maybe they've changed it since the last time I checked, but you don't have that same amount of malleability of those functions within Premiere, and that kind of concerns me a bit.
Yeah. Speaking of that, this is actually a really good follow-up question to that. Are there any specific companies that you rely on for recovering any corrupted files?
Oh, hopefully there aren't any corrupted files. Like if there's corrupted files, you've kind of got a bit of a problem in your hands, and it's the DIT's fault. Speaking of which, I see somebody saying about in Canada the DIT and something about the DIT. I've definitely done very low budget jobs where I've had to act as DIT as well, but no, the DIT here is generally considered to be part of the camera team, and that's because they're actually grading little LUTs into the footage as well, so it's a very specific role.
Okay.
Have I answered that?
Yeah. And I suppose I guess everyone at the moment is working from home. Well, mostly anyway. Is there anything that you've learned, do you think, as an assistant during COVID that you maybe like hadn't known, or how do you feel about like this new kind of sense of working?
Great. So I haven't necessarily learned any new technical skills. I have, however, I've basically used this on the job I'm on at the moment. We're in turnover season, so we're locking episodes and we're doing that sort of thing. So that's an interesting thing to manage. But what I'm finding, I've got so much time on my hands. I'm using it to upskill, really, just in terms of the things that. So I'm at a stage where I'm looking to start to edit in the next few years. So I'm actually looking at things more like soft skill stuff, such as I'm trying to learn about story structure and having conversations with editors really about how they manage that side of things. And really what I'm going to take out of it essentially is this work-life balance is great. Can we keep this up, please? And just kind of have a bit of that kind of chill moving forward, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just trying to answer a few of these. Someone's asking about negotiating pay for assistant jobs. You should always ask for the BECTU rate. The BECTU rates for editors are on the BECTU website, and I will put that in the chat function for you now. So if you just put into their rates, it'll come up, and there's 5 different rate cards across the post-production and facilities branch. So yeah, definitely stick to them. And if you need any tips on that, then you can come back to us. Yes, it's Sarah Putz Associates. They run a fantastic trainee scheme.
She is really great. I've been to quite a few of her panels over the last little while, and even on stuff that you think that you know, it's you know, she gets it so much better, and she's so clear and encouraging. I'm just, by the way, posting a whole bunch of links that I meant to round up kind of at the end of this. I suggest I'm going to try and post these to the YouTube eventual post of these. Some of them are the ones I mentioned about. So Eleanor and Imogen's webinar from a few weeks ago. Then there's the BCPC assistant editing in scripted television. There's also a webinar by Dan Gage, who was the assistant editor on Fleabag, who talks you through his project, because I see somebody else asking about project management. The answer to that is I tend to change the way that I do things depending on the project and depending on the editors that I'm working with. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. It just, as long as you can find everything really, really easily. Yeah.
Cool. I think that's it. Oh, someone's asking, do you recommend working with an agent?
Not yet. No, not until you're an editor. I don't think you need them as an assistant.
I don't think you could get one as an assistant, could you?
No, I mean, there are diary management services if you work in freelancing commercials and things like that. But certainly, and there are assistants who will take on, there are agents, sorry, who will take on assistants. I don't think you need them to get those jobs. I think you need them, like, you need to network basically to get those jobs. So every job that I've gotten so far has just been through contacts and through maybe the odd one posted on Facebook. But it's you don't need an agent to get those to you. They will normally be word of mouth through your contacts, really.
Finally, because I think actually with COVID that has caused a huge amount of redundancies. Do you have any advice for people who are currently editing video outside the TV industry wanting to move into it?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're editing, really. I know people who've made their way up to edit on big things without having gone through the assist route, but it's very rare.
Yeah,
I would say that you will need to start out as do that pathway of going from, you know, post PA and runner, starting out as a trainee, and really, like, and then working your way through the ranks. And, you know, don't worry about age. Or I know some people are worried about, at the moment, they're graduating from uni into potentially another recession. I graduated into a recession. I didn't get my first job in the industry until I was 27. And I know people who are even older than that who are career changing and stuff like that. Commercials is different, but certainly in long form drama, there's no upper age limit. You know, that if you are working, if you're quite old and still working as an assistant, people might just assume you're a career assistant, and so there's not really a right or wrong. You know, you can do it at whatever age you like, basically. I mean, look at Anne Coates. She is, you've got quite a lot of longevity as an editor. She cut Erin Brockovich when she was 75. She cut 50 Shades of Grey when she was 90.
What?
So
Did she?
Yeah, for real. And, you know, you can move up whenever. I know people who were assistants for 5 years. I know people who were assistants for 10 years. I know people who were assistants for 15 years, really, really good editors.
Yeah.
I know one editor who's phenomenal, who was an assistant for 29 years.
Yeah. And so, we also know people who have consciously stopped taking assistant jobs, haven't we? Because they want to step up to editing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but that would be for a different kind of session. But that, you know, it has all the range, doesn't it? Which is quite it makes editing quite special, I think, in that way.
It does. And I wouldn't worry how long it's going to take you. Actually, almost the longer you can spend as an assistant, because of the aforementioned sort of mentoring that you get, the better you come out kind of at the end of it.
Yeah. It also just gives you this amazing opportunity to assist a broad range of editors, doesn't it? And that's always working your network, which is good. Aideen Johnston, thank you so much. That was amazing. I hope everyone has learnt loads. I just learn loads from all of you all the time, so it's really fantastic, even though I don't know anything about editing. Thank you very much, Aideen.
Thank you very much.
Big clap around.
You will imagine it.
I know, yeah. Okay, thanks everyone. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll be able to welcome you back next week. Thanks, Aideen. Bye.